Good evening, and welcome to Smackanori. Tonight we're going to tell a little story of George Stephenson, whose main claim to fame in the pugilistic arena was he was the man who died after the bout with Jack Broughton, which brought about the introduction of the first ever rule set. But this is a story that comes from his early days. So let's talk about George Stephenson. This is from Fred Henning's Fights for the Championship, The Men and Their Times. A fantastic book. Excuse the glasses. I'm getting on a bit, and now I need them, sadly. He was some 2 years previously only a common stable lad in the service of old Richard Sykes, a wealthy merchant of Hull, and an ancestor of the Sir Tatton Sykes, of whom we've heard so much lately in our courts of law. Young George's duties were to exercise the horses at his merchant's mansion in Sledmere, in Yorkshire, where he kept a fairly good stud. By degrees, Stephenson was promoted to under coachman, and being a splendid athlete, a strapping young chap, and as strong as a lion, he soon became a great favourite, especially with the lady visitors to the hall. In the village too, he made himself very popular, for there wasn't a lad for miles round could hold his own with George Stephenson with the fists, quarterstaff, or broadsword. He was looked upon as the champion of Yorkshire, and none durst dispute the title, although, of course, having such a good situation, he rarely sought the exercise of his pugilistic abilities. Soon, however, accident made him more conspicuous than ever. The old merchant had taken to himself a second wife, a beautiful young creature who cared more for the society of those her own age than for the old millionaire's attentions. So, whenever Sykes went to London, he rarely took his handsome spouse with him on account of her remarkable attractions. She displayed her taste for gaiety by giving and attending balls and parties, inviting and visiting the gentry for miles around. It was during the winter of 1739 that the Hall merchant had made one of his journeys to London, necessitating an absence of as many weeks as it would take, days now, and his wife, relieved of his presence, accepted an invitation to a ball given by a somewhat fast-going set residing about 10 miles from Sledmere. When she was about to set out on the particular evening, the head coachman, who had been in the service of the family for years and who was a trusted servant of Mr. Sykes, was suffering so badly from gout that he was unable to mount the box of the old lumbering but exceedingly comfortable coach. Consequently, George Stephenson's service were requisitioned, and it was this simple matter which altered the whole of the young coachman's career. All went well on the journey to the house at which the ball was given, and the beautiful young wife of Mr. Richard Sykes, glittering in her diamonds and looking her best, won the hearts of half the men present, and when in the small hours of the morning, with the winter moon shining brightly, the ladies' coach was driven round to the entrance, there were a dozen and more volunteers begging for the favour of seeing Madam safely home, whilst there was no lack of suggestions as to the dangers of the lonely road. But Mrs. Sykes would have none of their protection, laughingly telling them, as she threw herself back amongst her furs, that she had a bodyguard enough in her trusty coachman, and that she felt quite safe with him to protect her. There was many an envious eye cast up at the magnificent fellow on the box seat, for even amongst the gentlefolk, George Stephenson was well known for his muscularity and commanding figure, whilst remarks were indulged, in which would certainly have made the lady in the coach frown if they had not called forth blushes to her fair cheeks. All went well as the pair of great horses clattered along the hard frosty road until they were more than halfway to Sledmere, when the quick eye of Master George detected a horseman reined up under the shadow of a tree at a bend in the lane. Whipping up his horses and peering into the semi-darkness, he saw a second and third, when his suspicions were aroused, and he knew that it was a question of stand and deliver, for many highwaymen infested the country at this period, particularly when balls were in progress and there was jewellery to be had for the asking. As the coach neared the horsemen, the three wheeled into the middle of the road, and if nothing else, the masks on their foreheads stamped them for what they were. As quick as lightning, George drew a horse pistol from his side and blazed at the nearest man who advanced. His aim was true, and the fellow toppled over. Whiz, whiz went the bullets over his head, and the other two closed up. But Stevenson lashed away so with his whip at their spirited horses that they reared and threw their riders. The coachman, maddened by the piercing shrieks from the fair lady, leapt from the box and struck with the butt of his pistol one of the fellows, smashing his face in. Then turning to the third, who had drawn another loaded pistol from his holster and was about to fire, Stevenson dashed in and, using his fists with crushing effect, laid him senseless beside his two companions. Then, disregarding Madam, who had fainted away in the coach, he remounted the box and dashed away, to a neighbouring village, fearful lest there might be more of the gang in attendance. George Stevenson had, through his presence of mind and courage, saved his lady's jewellery, perhaps her life, and she never forgot it. I hope you've enjoyed this. I'm going to be reading some more from this book because it's a particularly well written and an enjoyable read. If you're subscribed to me on Patreon, if you're one of my patrons and you're supporting me there, then check within the next 24 hours because I'll carry on the tale of Stevenson from that spot over on Patreon, but that's going to be exclusively for supporters. If you're not a supporter, then please consider supporting me through Patreon. There's a link down below.